Hello everybody, SlimKirby here, and I'm going on a long journey of trying to complete every single Game Boy Advance game in North America. This is the story of the highs, the lows, and all the silly stuff in between for the Game Boy Advance completion experience. This is GB Ace. Game number 31, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, and Four Swords. Oh boy, time for a game that you guys surely have never seen me play before. Unless you've watched my Let's Play or the 900 other randomizer runs I've done for this game. So yeah, A Link to the Past probably needs no introduction here. It's a pretty popular and well-known game, so it's no surprise that it was chosen to receive the handheld port treatment, especially when you consider the fact that quite a number of NES and SNES games were kind of receiving that kind of treatment on the GBA anyway. We technically have already seen that in action with our very first game of this challenge, Super Mario Advance, and Link to the Past will not be the last instance of this either. In fact, it won't even be the last of the Zelda series in general, as I believe both NES titles also had ports as well in the classic NES series. Although people would probably argue those as more straight-up ports more than anything, well, this game actually has some other bells and whistles that makes it a little more unique. So yeah, 1 decade after the release of the original on SNES, A Link to the Past and Four Swords released on the Game Boy Advance in December of 2002, published and developed by Nintendo, with also some additional development by Capcom. Yeah, that's right, the same company that's responsible for Mega Man and the Street Fighter series, they worked on this too. In addition to featuring the entire game from the SNES installment, this version actually includes a special and additional game in the form of Four Swords, a co-op multiplayer experience where you can link up with 3 additional people who have the game and Game Boy Advances and have a nice fun little cooperative affair. Definitely not the most ideal way to do multiplayer with that amount of people, considering the setup and much needed proximity between all 4 players if you're using that link cable. But thankfully, Nintendo was nice enough to release this game on Nintendo Switch Online, with capabilities of doing this via online play, which is pretty cool. It's a nice instance of game preservation that adds some convenience as well. They also released an anniversary edition of Four Swords on Nintendo DSiWare, which actually allows you to play this mode single player too, which unfortunately is kind of lost media these days, and I won't really be able to use that as a result. But hey, again, it's why it's a good thing NSO exists. It may not be the greatest service in terms of connectivity and game drip feeding, but it has a lot more good than bad going for it, that's for sure. Although you do need the expansion pass if you do want to play this game in particular. And of course, enough friends to actually play along with you. So here's the deal. For this challenge, I'm only going to be beating A Link to the Past to consider this game complete. However, at a future date and time, I will be coming back to this game for a showcase of the Four Swords mode, as well as a showcase of the optional dungeon in the main game that unlocks from playing Four Swords, and another additional side quest as well. After all, I kinda need other people to play this mode anyway, or at least that was the original intention, and the fact of the matter is, I just can't guarantee that people will be available, at least during my usual stream time. So that's just the way it's gotta be, unfortunately. However, I may have talked to a person or two behind the scenes, and I can guarantee it will happen. I just won't know until a certain point, so bear with me on that. So yeah, let's jump into A Link to the Past. Long ago, there existed a golden land that contained a golden power that was seized by an evil beast, and the beast's evil desires transferred that sacred realm into what is now known as the Dark World. It took the power of 7 wise men, or sages as you could also identify them as, to seal that world and also imprison the evil beast in the Dark World realm, to keep Hyrule and the World of Light safe from his evil doing. However, since there is still a connection between those worlds, that beast, or Ganon as we more commonly know him as, is capable of using his dark power to control a mysterious wizard named Aghanim to do his bidding for him. This wizard has a plan to weaken the seal between the 2 worlds and release the evil King of Beasts onto the Light World again, giving him total dominion across both realms. To do this, a Ganon needs to capture 7 descendants of those sages, and personally send them back to the Dark World in the process, which will fully break that seal and Ganon's imprisonment. A Ganon manages to seize full control over Hyrule Castle, killing the king in the process and making all the guards loyal to him, pretty much giving him full control over this world's inhabitants, and making it pretty damn easy to obtain all 7 descendants in the process, 7 young maidens with the blood of the sages inside of them. One of those descendants just so happens to be Hyrule's very own Princess Zelda, and fearing she may be the next and final seal, she sends a telepathic message during the night that reaches a young boy named Link, or Slimbo in this canon, and his uncle. His uncle rushes ahead to take care of business, but Link can't help but shake the fact that this is his own opportunity to meet his destiny, so he heads off to the castle as well. Unfortunately, his uncle doesn't make it too far though, and it's pretty much wounded in the first screen. Well, rip to that guy, I guess. He gives us his sword and shield though, and remarks that we may in fact be Zelda's last chance at survival, so further into the castle we go. Much like the original Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past is an overhead adventure game where you can move around the world, do active combat with enemies, complete side quests and other objectives, and solve puzzles inside the various dungeons of the game. One of the buttons controls Link's sword, which he can use to swing at his enemies to do damage, but you can also hold it out in front of you to use as more of a stabbing motion, and if you hold it out for a brief period of time, you can also unleash a vicious spin attack, which can do great damage as well. The other face button acts as your item button, which if you press the select button, you can set one of your many items to that button to be used in the field. This item can be anything from a weapon or an additional tool that can benefit you in some way. For instance, the lamp you find in Link's house can be used to light torches to give you further visibility in dark rooms, or in some cases unlock certain doors that are triggered by those torches. And then you can also find a boomerang in Hyrule Castle, which can be used as a helpful tool for freezing enemies in place and using your sword to finish the job. We'll find lots of other helpful items throughout the game though, both optional and mandatory, so be sure to keep your eyes open for them. There's also an action button, which is actually the R button in this game. Now, of all the changes in this game, this was probably the one thing I found a bit cumbersome in this version, just because you use this button to lift and grab objects, run, when you have the ability to run anyway, and perhaps the most basic action, talk to NPCs and open chests. Now, don't get me wrong, this is probably not as bad as I'm making it sound, as I'm sure anyone who started playing this version probably wouldn't think too much about this, but keep in mind that I have spent my entire life to this point playing the SNES version, with the action button being one of the face buttons. And again, with all the randomizer I've done, that's only reinforced my muscle memory to be even stronger, so this is probably more of a me problem than an actual flaw of the game. After all, let's keep in mind that GBA has 2 less face buttons to use, so space is already kind of limited. Now, this game also made another change, a change that all of you are probably just waiting for me to address, so I'll just let the game speak for itself here. So yeah, they gave Link a voice in this game, or, well, not really a voice, but rather his young Link sound clips from Ocarina of Time. Now, I personally am not too bothered by this addition, it's just kind of whatever and is fairly easy to tune out, but I do agree that it was kind of unnecessary in retrospect, because the original game didn't have this, but I don't think it really hurts the game either, if I'm being honest. Anyway, after wandering through the castle for a bit, we come across Princess Zelda being held in a prison cell. We take out the nearby armed guard with the help of some fine Hyrule Castle pottery, and receive the key to unlock the door and free her from her jail cell. We now have to get the princess to safety, and the princess knows of a hidden passage in the castle that leads to a nearby place of worship, so we follow her instructions and make our way to the castle sewers, fight through various rats and snakes and bats, and get her to her place of sanctuary. This place of safety will not be permanent though. After all, it's not like the palace is locked down or anything and remains open throughout the entire course of the game, but hey, we got the castle guards scrambling, at least for now anyway. We are now tasked with finding the elder of Kakariko Village, Sahasrahla, as he has knowledge of a legendary blade called the Master Sword, and how we can obtain it for our own devices, as it may be our only tool for taking down Ganon. So we head on over to the village to find him. However, Sahasrahla is nowhere to be found, but thankfully a young kid can give us his exact location if we converse with him. I also spend some time in the village getting a couple of items, most notably a couple of heart pieces, where if we collect 4 of them, our health will increase by 1 heart, some bombs, which can be used as long-distance consumable weapons to fight enemies, or to blow open cracks in the wall that may conceal other hidden goodies, 2 bottles, which can be used to store health and magic potions, along with some other smaller creatures like fairies and bugs, which we can obtain by using the final item we can get here, the bug-catching net, which we borrow from an unfortunate bedridden sick kid. None of this stuff is required by any means. In fact, if you know the location of Sahasrahla's other residence, you can go straight there without even visiting here. But the stuff is nice if you are still trying to find your footing with this game. Plus, my muscle memory from Randomizer just makes this a good place to go in all Randomizer runs or even the vanilla game in general, so why not? After a long trek across the map, we find Sahasrahla in a nearby shed with adjacency to our first dungeon, the Eastern Palace. The wise village elder tells us that in order to use the Master Sword, we must prove our worth by securing the 3 pendants across the dungeons of Hyrule, the first of which being in the aforementioned Eastern Palace. So we head on over there to procure our first MacGuffin. Now, the Eastern Palace is actually a rather simple but effective first dungeon. It's not too complicated and doesn't have a lot of rooms, but does a pretty good job of giving you a taste of what to expect in this game, as it's pretty straightforward and linear when it needs to be. After making our way around the dungeon, we find a big key, which we can use to unlock not only big key doors, but also big chests, and inside this dungeon's big chest is the bow, which means we can now shoot arrows at our enemies. It's a pretty effective distance weapon and can actually do more damage to enemies in certain cases. In fact, the red eye rock enemies in the later part of the dungeon can only be harmed in this fashion, so you're not getting through this palace without procuring it. Eventually we run into the boss of this place, the vicious Armos Knights. However, 3 arrows into each statue will put this boss to a very quick end, so make sure you keep your bow heavily stocked for this fight. After the knights go down, we receive our first pendant. We show our acquisition to Sahasrahla, and not only does he congratulate us, but he shows us our next destination, gives us a much needed convenience item, and even gives us a hint of an area we will need to check out later. However, the item we got is probably the biggest reward of them all, as we now have the Pegasus boots. These boots allow us to dash across Hyrule at a very quick pace, and since Link has a sword, he runs in a way where he holds his sword out in front of him, allowing you to pretty much dash through enemies without getting interrupted. Well, except in a few cases, but those cases are few and far between. Not to mention, there are also many instances of long stretches of land where you can pretty much dash across the entire screen, so it makes getting around actually really convenient. The boots are also required to procure a few items throughout the game, most notably this book in the village library that we can obtain if we dash into the bookshelf. This is the Book of Medora, which contains all the secrets of the Hyrule language, and if you ever need to read a mysterious tablet or epitaph, it can be used as a translation of sorts, so again, very helpful. I also obtain a few more heart pieces, check out Lake Hylia due to the Elder's Words, which allows us to find the Ice Rod, a weapon that might seem incredibly optional due to its location and current functionality, but trust me, it's very much required, so thank you Sahasrahla for mentioning this. Anyway, since the mountain is currently off limits, the desert seems to be our next destination, so we head over to the Desert Palace for the next pendant. Along the way, we bother an old man by blowing a hole into his wall, talking to him, and leaving without even investigating the hole. Man, I can be such a jerk sometimes. I hope this doesn't come back to bite me later. We then reach the desert palace, and sure enough, we need the Book of Medora to perform a prayer that will cause the dungeon to open, allowing us to explore this new location. The Desert Palace is a very interesting dungeon. In fact, if you know the layout, it's probably the shortest dungeon in the entire game. It actually has two parts, a front and a back section, and as you might expect, the boss is hidden in the back. However, we need the item from the front to even access that area, as this dungeon's big chest contains the Power Bracelet, an item that will allow us to pick up rocks and large stones, which happen to be blocking the back entrance, as well as our path up the mountain. The boss of this dungeon are the dreaded Landmola worms, which, honestly, they aren't too bad. In fact, if you brought the ice rod and can use it effectively, each worm only needs 2 hits to the head to knock it out, making it a pretty decent investment this early on in the game. You can also use your bow and arrow to some success, but it takes a lot longer and can be a bit annoying to aim properly if the Landmolas don't move in the right angle or direction. Worst case scenario, you can just use your sword as well. Just be careful of the rock attack they use whenever they emerge from the ground, and be aware that it changes a little when there's only 1 Landmola remaining. Still, not a very hard boss, and when we beat it, we get another magical pendant. With the Power Glove, we can pretty much access the final big section of Hyrule, Death Mountain. But before we do, I decide to complete another errand in the overworld by procuring the flippers at Zora's domain. The big guy himself, King Zora, will allow us to purchase these flippers by spending a grand total of 500 rupees. A purchase that you may not be able to make if you haven't been treasure hunting as much as I have, but thankfully you are in no immediate need to get these. In fact, I really only got them now just because I needed to get rid of some rupees since I was pretty close to my max amount anyway. Anyway, the flippers will now allow us to swim in the many waterways of Hyrule, which can allow us to get some even more cool stuff. If we visit the nearby waterfall fairy, we can throw our boomerang and shield into the sacred pond and have a fairy bless them with even further magical properties, allowing our shield to protect against fireball projectiles and the boomerang to go even farther when thrown. Also, in the middle of Lake Hylia, we can actually find another cave with a fairy inside, and every time we throw 100 rupees into the pond, the fairy will give us an option to increase our max bomb and arrow capacities. The max amount for these items is 50 bombs and 70 arrows, and since we start at 10 and 30 respectively, that's 7 upgrades we have to purchase for both items. So yeah, we can't max out these amounts just yet, due to the sheer amount of rupees we need, but may as well get started, right? It's finally time to head to Death Mountain to receive our last pendant. As we climb the cave upwards, we meet an old man who asks us to take him back to his lodging. When we do, he decides to give us a mirror as a gift. Not just any mirror, though, a magical mirror. This mirror apparently has the ability to help lost travelers find their way back to the world of light if they so happen to get lost in the dark world. And sure enough, when we head up to the Spectacle Rock, we discover a mysterious portal that does this. Okay, terrible GBA sound effect aside, we have now been transported to the Dark World and have become quite acquainted with our new Bunny Sona. Apparently, that's the big gimmick of the Dark World. It completely transforms the state of a person into a non-human creature, unless you can find an artifact called the Moon Pearl, which will allow you to keep your form. However, since we have the magic mirror, we can use it to get back to the light world whenever we wish, as it will basically take you back to whatever exact position you're in, just in the light world instead. How convenient. In fact, it's so convenient that you can use this to climb the last leg of the mountain, which you'd be unable to otherwise, giving us access to the next dungeon, the Tower of Hera, or the Mountain Tower as it's called in this game. This dungeon is interesting because although all the dungeons so far have had multiple floors to explore, this dungeon actually makes use of them in a very creative way, allowing you to fall through the floor down to a lower level if you need to get something you may have missed in your ascents. In fact, you may need to use this to fall to a lower level just to access something that would be inaccessible otherwise, so pay attention to where holes are and where they could conceivably go. This dungeon also shows off another novelty of the magic mirror, as if you use it in a dungeon, you will immediately warp back to the start of the dungeon. Although not helpful in all cases, considering you could accidentally use it at a very inopportune time, It does come in handy here when getting the big key, as it allows you to take a bit of a shortcut back since the key is in the basement, but the door you need to use it on is on the second floor, so it just kind of takes a little bit of the travel time out of the equation. The dungeon item here is not really an item you need to beat the dungeon, but an item you definitely want to pick up, the Moon Pearl I discussed earlier. Although it won't come into play now, it will very soon, and you'd be saving yourself a lot of trouble and time if you pick it up on your first visit, just saying. When we reach the top of the tower, we meet the bane of every speedrunner's existence in this game, Moldorm. Although to be fair, Landmo can be a bit of a pain too, just because it's really hard to aim with the bow, but Moldorm is definitely a boss that can be a complete pushover one day, but an absolute headache on another. All he does is just wander around on his platform, but if he bumps or hits you at the wrong time, you'll likely fall into the gap and need to start the entire fight all over again. Moldorm's body is quite bouncy as well, so if you strike a part of him that isn't his tail weak point, you may also experience some knockback there as well, so be very, very careful with this guy. I thankfully had a pretty good fight with him this time, as I didn't have any falls, and although you'd probably credit my experience for that, trust me, there are days where I have a few falls here. It just kind of depends on what side of the bed Moldorm wakes up on that morning, I guess. After taking down the big guy, we get our final pendant, which means it's time to finally receive the Blade of Evil's Bane, the Master Sword. So we head down to the Lost Woods to see if we can find it. And sure enough, in a very intricate clearing on a grand pedestal waiting for us, we showcase our 3 pendants, pull on the blade's hilt, and the Master Sword finally becomes ours. However, even though things are looking up for us right now, the game decides it's time to have a bit of a reality check, because really, the princess wasn't that well hidden, and we were kind of foolish to think that a church a few feet behind the castle was a great hiding place for Zelda. We receive a telepathic message from the sanctuary claiming that Zelda has once again been kidnapped by the wizard, so now it's time to do what we can to save her before it's too late. With our new blade, we can break the magic spell on the upper level of the castle and start climbing the tower until we reach Agonim's quarters. This part of the game is honestly kind of cool since you're basically fighting the castle guards again, but now your weapon does a bit more damage, and your other weapons can come in clutch in other ways as well, so you really start to see how powerful you have become so far. After climbing up a lot of floors, we finally make it to Agonim and Zelda, but unfortunately it's too late as the evil wizard sends her to the Dark World and officially breaks the seal. Well, damn it. We do battle with Aghanim by reflecting his energy shots right back at him, kinda similar to other fights we'll have throughout this series when you really think about it. And after 6 hits, Aghanim decides that he's had enough of us and sends us to the Dark World as well, completely unaware that we actually have the Moon Pearl, so we actually keep our form and don't become a bunny anymore. Which, by the way, if you do become a bunny at this part, you will have to do quite a bit of backtracking back up to Mountain Tower to get your pearl. This is why I said make sure you get it on your first trip, no matter the cost. However, don't be too alarmed that the Dark World seems a bit too intense for you right now, because you do still have your magic mirror as well, and it will allow you to go back to the light world whenever you want, so it's pretty convenient. Sahasrara is capable of communicating with us still, somehow, and he lets us know that our best course of action is to rescue the 7 maidens that are being held throughout the various dungeons of the Dark World, pointing us in the direction of the Palace of Darkness for our first one. Not that it matters too much, since we can't really even get to other parts of this world anyway without some other tools regardless, but still, it's good to have a little bit of direction anyway. I take this time to also travel north to a mysterious pool with a circle of rocks. I toss an object into the circle and get yelled at by a giant catfish who decides to give us the magical Quake medallion as a punishment, I guess? Anyway, this is a nice tool that acts as kind of a screen nuke of sorts. It won't necessarily destroy all enemies, but can perform some interesting effects on some of them, potentially making it weaker. I also showcase the convenience of the magic mirror along the way by using it to stop off at the Lightworld Potion Shop, turning a mushroom I got in the Lost Woods into a bag of magic powder, which can be used to have some interesting effects on enemies. potentially turning some of them into fairies when you need that little bit of help in a pinch. But yeah, the magic mirror does actually make getting some items in the light world a little more convenient if you missed them previously, making the routing for speedruns very interesting. In fact, most speedrunners don't even pick up the flippers until they go for the Quake medallion, just because it's a long trip up in that direction, and you honestly don't even need the flippers for a while in the speedrun anyway. Seriously, the Link to the Past speedrunning and randomizer communities are awesome, and sure, there may be a bit of bias there as I was very active in the latter for a while, but still, my point stands. After those errands, we finally head to the Palace of Darkness, and after paying some of our fortune to a cheeky little monkey named Kiki, the little primate opens the dungeon for us and allows us passage. Even though this dungeon does have some similarities to Eastern Palace, at least in an initial viewing, this dungeon is way bigger and more complicated. There are way more paths, a lot more key doors, and even tougher enemies to boot. The mimics, although they look like the Iroks from earlier and have similar properties to how they take damage, will even get you to think about how you'll need to take them down. And I think that's personally pretty cool about this game. It's definitely more engaging and less cryptic than the freaking Darknuts and Wizrobes from Zelda 1, am I right? This dungeon probably also holds one of the most important items you'll get, not just in the entire Dark World, but even in the entire game, the magical hammer. This tool allows you to pound down pegs that might be blocking your path, in both dungeons and in the overworld as well, and this honestly blocks a lot more than you think it would. In fact, once you get this hammer, the next 3 dungeons are actually open to you, and you can actually take them on in any order you choose, and if you choose a specific one, that can also open even more options after that as well, giving you a little bit more freedom in the order of operations for this game, which I think was pretty cool for its time. It's honestly why the randomizer works pretty well in this game, because there's always seems to be a second way of doing or beating something. But I could talk about the randomizer all day until the cows come home, so I'll try to cut it out there and move on with this game. After wandering through the darkness for a while, we come across the Helmasaur King, a giant armor-masked creature with some devastating fire breath and a super flexible tail. I'll say it now, this boss can actually be kinda scary if you aren't careful. He does a lot of damage, and you're still on your first row of hearts as well. Not to mention, he takes a lot of hits to take down, so you're in the fight for quite a bit of time. You essentially have to wear down his mask, with the hammer or even bombs work as well, and then once the mask is gone, apply a bunch of arrows or sword slashes directly to his face. I actually got close to dying here, but managed to stay alive by the slightest amount of range. See? Even experienced players like myself can still cut it close sometimes. When the king goes down, we receive a crystal and proceed to rescue our first maiden, with 6 still to go. Like I said before, you actually have a choice of where you can go and what challenge you can take on next, as getting the hammer allows you to open a couple of warp points across the world map in the light world, so you don't necessarily have to go straight to the second crystal. I will for the sake of this game's intended order, but just let it be known. So yeah, I hit up the Swamp Palace next, a dungeon that has a puzzle before you can even pass through the first room. In the Dark World, you can't actually progress very far at all, and actually need to go back to the Light World first, release the floodgates to the dam, and then return to the Dark World to see the water flowing after the fact. Nice attention to detail there, game. Now, Zelda normally gets a bad reputation for water dungeons, but I honestly think the Swamp Palace is done very well. You do have a few puzzles that involve releasing more water so you can get around, and a crystal switch puzzle that could troll you if you accidentally leave the wrong set of pegs up when going for the big key. But trust me, once you get the hookshot, you'll never look back, because this seriously might be one of the coolest items in the entire series. I just like the idea of being able to grab onto faraway ledges, and it just opens up a great deal of potential for not just exploration, but also combat as well. This is no hookshot from Link's Awakening, but it can still KO a majority of the smaller and weaker enemies, and at least stun some of the more advanced ones too. Seriously, this item is correct. We use the hookshot to get to the back, and at some point we run into Argus, the boss of this place. As you might think, we need to use our new tool on this boss, and sure enough, that is correct, because he is completely surrounded by these little puff guys. After using the hookshot to remove every single one and slashing them out of existence, Argus gets mad and tries to run us down, but if we use common sense, movement, and positioning, he will be no issue. Crystal 2 acquired, and Maiden number 2 rescued. Now, as I mentioned before, we still have numerous options of what to do, and we're about to hit the area that easily has the most options up for grabs. The area around the Village of Outcasts, or rather Kakariko in the Dark World, so I keep myself pretty busy for the next couple of minutes. I discover another one of the magic medallions, this time the Magic of Bombos, and while this one is actually optional, it's probably even better for crowd clearing than the Quake medallion, and actually will help us out later in a certain boss fight. I also discover a lonely creature on a stump who misses his ocarina, so he sends us to the Light World to dig it up for him. This instrument is quite handy because we can play it to summon a bird that can help us fly to a couple of locations on the world map in the Light World, including some places that we couldn't reach otherwise, which means we will have to use it later to make progress. When we get to the Village of Thieves, I also play 2 games of chance for heart pieces, probably the worst aspects of going for 100% in this game, since it's all RNG basically. My only advice, for the treasure chest game, just open up the same 2 chests every single time. Eventually, you'll get the item. And for the dig game, you can kinda do the same thing, just dig in the same patterns, and at some point you'll get it. It just may take a while because, again, it's RNG, but still, you really don't have to overthink this. It will just take a little bit of time. I was pretty happy and excited that I got the digging game on my first try, though. And lastly, I returned to the Light World, used the hammer to access a cave drop-down, and discovered an altar that I used magic powder on, and summoned the Mad Batter. This guy was not happy with us, so he decided to curse us by forcing all magic items of ours to use half the magic power that they normally use, while still having the same strength and impact as before. Psst! Nobody better tell him that it actually makes things a lot easier for us and is not really a curse. I finally move on to Dungeon 3, which takes place in the Dark World Lost Woods, now called Skull Woods. This dungeon is kind of like the Desert Palace. It has a lot of different paths and entrances, and can kind of feel more like just an extended overworld location like Death Mountain, for example. But no, it's still a dungeon. Not a very big or long dungeon though, but it's still treated as one just the same. It also has one of the most annoying enemies in the game, the Wall Master. Basically the, hey, let me take you back to the beginning of the dungeon enemy of the game, and yeah, we don't like those here. This dungeon's item is the Fire Rod, the sister to the Ice Rod we picked up earlier. I gotta say though, the Fire Rod is infinitely more helpful than the Ice Rod is, not only being great in combat, but also practical as it can act like a long-range lantern to light torches. Also, with that nifty magic curse we got a bit ago, it's actually not even too bad of an idea just to use this as your attacking weapon in some places of the game in general. It's just that good. We actually use it to open the back part of this dungeon and get access to the boss, Mothula. Mothula might honestly be the toughest boss in this game, but it's not even because of him, rather his arena. This floor is one giant conveyor belt, it's surrounded by spikes, the spikes even move, Mothula constantly moves, his projectiles go in 3 different directions. Yeah, there's a lot going on here and a lot to dodge. The Fire Rod will do some good damage to him though, but it's also limited in shots, so keep that in mind. Here's something fun though. If you have a bee in a bottle, the bee will actually attack Mothula and do damage to him. It's not a lot of damage, but hey, I got the little guy to finish him off, which was kinda cool. Crystal number 3 acquired, and Maiden number 3 rescued. The 4th dungeon is actually not too far from where we are now, as it's actually located in the Village of Outcasts by itself. And here's the interesting thing, you don't even need the hookshot or fire rod for it, just the hammer, so you can complete this pretty early. In fact, if you want an easier time in the previous 2 dungeons, it's almost recommended to do this dungeon first, as it unlocks some pretty nice rewards for doing so. But yeah, say hello to Thieves Town, a dungeon that's rumored to be the main base of operations for a monster thief named Blind, a creature that just can't stand any source of sunlight whatsoever. This dungeon is kinda cool though, and is laid out in a very interesting way, especially at first as you try to navigate the first 4 rooms trying to find the right path to get to the big key, which will basically unlock the entire rest of the dungeon for you. At some point in the dungeon, you'll run into a girl being held against her will. Hey, wait a minute, is that the maiden we're looking for? She's not in a crystal, but she does look like one of the maidens. I wonder what this is all about. Oh well, we'll find out later. The dungeon item for this place is much less exciting than the last 3 we got, at least in a combat sense, because we get an upgrade for the power glove in the form of the Titan's Mitt. This basically just allows us to pick up bigger and heavier stones, and that's really about it. However, the last 3 dungeons are blocked by these stones, so we had to get this sometime, I guess. Anyway, the muscle memory prevents me from showing this off in full, but there is a very interesting puzzle in this dungeon involving the boss. You see, the girl we're escorting out of here isn't who she claims to be. In fact, she doesn't really even seem to want to leave the dungeon or go into the attic just because of the sunlight. Just like the Master Thief, right? Well, after blowing a hole in the attic previously, we allow a source of light to shine into a room below, and if we take the girl to that location, she'll turn into, yep, you guessed it, it was blind all along. Of course it was. Blind can be another tricky fight as well, especially if you aren't super into bullet hell-like scenarios, as you could have 3 different sources of fire coming at you from various directions if you aren't careful. And that kind of gameplay can surely be overwhelming for some. I know it can be for me sometimes. I like to think my many years of the randomizer has gotten me very used to this fight though, as I actually managed to win without taking any damage whatsoever, and hey, you'll love to see that. Crystal number 4 obtained, and Maiden number 4 rescued. So yeah, how about those Titan's Mitts, eh? Well, first of all, and most importantly, we can use our new item to rescue a frog in the southern part of the Village of Outcasts. This frog, when taken back to the light world, ends up being a swordsmithy who has been separated from his partner for far too long. And if we reunite the two, they can actually make our Master Sword even more powerful by turning it orange. Hey, that works for me anyway. I heavily recommend doing this, by the way. You can pretty much get through the rest of the game with just the Master Sword, but trust me, the less hits you need for certain enemies and bosses just feels a hell of a lot better. Dungeon number 5 is the Ice Palace, located in the middle of Lake Hylia, and yes, this dungeon is quite notorious for people who grew up with this game. Not only do you have undesirable ice physics in here, but the dungeon itself is just very long and it has a lot of very hard-hitting enemies. And heck, that's part of the reason why the dungeon item is just a defense upgrade, a clothing swap that makes you take less damage from enemies. Heck, this dungeon can be quite the puzzling experience as well, forcing you to go around in a giant circle of rooms at one point because you need to have the right crystal switch color activated. That was always my major hang-up when I was younger anyway. These days, I kind of know what's going on more because of randomizer, but still, for newer players, I can honestly see why this dungeon is probably a lot of people's least favorite. Because of how intimidating this dungeon can be, let me show you something cool that I learned from my big randomizer phase. In this room right here, if you have the specific colored pegs up, you can use a bomb at a very precise location and use the explosion from that bomb to skip past these pegs, making it so you don't even have to do the giant loop around the crystal switch. This seriously makes this dungeon take so much less time, and as you can see right here, oh yeah, I almost forgot, they changed this puzzle in this version. Well, so much for learning advanced tech, right? So honestly, don't get me wrong, the bomb jump could still be seen as helpful as it does allow you to skip quite a bit and just go straight to the boss if you so desire, but you still probably want to pick up the blue mail at least, as it will help keep you safer from the late game enemies in this next stretch. But if you don't want to learn the bomb jump, yeah, they actually made this section a lot easier and faster in this version of the game. Heck, this is probably the biggest change they probably made in this entire game from a normal game progression standpoint, as I think every other dungeon pretty much went unchanged, at least as far as I can remember anyway. Boss number 5 is Cold Stare, and yeah, you better have magic power on your magic meter. You pretty much have to melt his ice casting with the fire rod or the bombos medallion if you have it, before you can actually do damage to him. See, I told you it'd be useful to us someday. In fact, it's so helpful it actually allows you to use the fire rod for any additional shots as well if you have the power, which can absolutely annihilate him if you do use it. Despite these inconveniences, he's still a pretty easy boss, especially with what we have in our possession and arsenal now. But be warned that he can actually be quite the pain if you don't have a lot of safety items, since he seriously hits like the equivalent of 7 trucks if he does do damage to you directly. Seriously, just be careful around him, and you should be fine. Anyway, once we defeat him, we get crystal number 5 and rescue the 5th maiden. Only 2 more to go. Believe it or not, we're about to hit the closing stretch of this game because the final dungeon is not far from Dark World Dungeon number 7, and we're on number 6 right now. Before we do that though, I pretty much finish up the rest of my errands in the overworld. I purchased the remaining capacity upgrades, and although I think I did this particular thing earlier, I also bonked on this grave near the sanctuary, which opened up a tomb with a treasure chest containing the magic cape, an item that makes you completely invisible and invincible to enemy attacks. Definitely a great item to use if you have magic power to spare and are in a tough spot in a dungeon or boss fight. And if we go back to Death Mountain, we can find this interesting cave where you can actually use the magic cape to get another item that pretty much does the same thing, called the Cane of Burna. Okay, the same as stretching it a bit, as this item doesn't make you invisible, but it does use less magic power. Although, you do lose the capability to use spin attacks while using the Cane of Burna, so Cape is still probably superior as an item choice. The main reason we came back to Death Mountain, though, was not for this optional item, but rather an item that's much less optional, as we need it to get into the next dungeon. Basically, you'll find another tablet up here next to the Tower of Hera, and releasing the magic here will give you the Ether Medallion, the last of the 3 medallions, and this one actually freezes enemies on screen, or at least stronger enemies anyway. Weaker ones will still be destroyed though. It's not as effective as the Bombos medallion is, but I'd say it's probably better than the Quake medallion at least. Anyway, for the next dungeon we need to head to the desert area, but in the Dark World, and if you look at the map you'll notice that this area is pretty much closed off. This is why you need the Ocarina, because the warp point in the desert area actually takes you to a nice little plateau with a heavy stone that has a Dark World portal on it. Ah, you see? The pieces are finally falling into place. Also Pieces, Game of the Year. Anyway, say hello to the Misery Mire area, and as you can see, the dungeon has a little indentation of the Ether Medallion symbol, so let's use the magic coin and we can take on our next challenge. Mire was always one of those dungeons where, as a kid, I don't really remember how I beat it or figured it out, but it always seemed to be one of the faster and easier ones for me, probably because it's less emphasized by puzzles this time around, and more so on the fact that the enemies hit pretty hard instead. Heck, you only need the Cane of Samaria, the dungeon item this time around, for one thing in here, and once you have that, you can pretty much make a V-line to the end. The boss this time is Vitreous, another enemy surrounded by smaller, more rambunctious minions, this time little eyeballs, and real talk, if you have the health, potions, or fairies to spare, you can literally just stand in front of them and just spam the sword button until all the eyes are gone. Be careful of that green goop though, because it does hurt you if you get too close to it and make contact with it. However, if you want a very easy way to take him down, just put on the cape, walk into the boss, and just start slashing your sword until he moves on to phase 2. It's really that simple. In phase 2, not really knowing what to do, Vitreous just charges at you, and you can make quick work of him by repelling him with your sword. It's seriously that easy. Crystal number 6 acquired, and Maiden number 6 rescued. We only have one more dungeon left, and this one is on the farthest reaches of Death Mountain, an area we couldn't really access until getting not only the hookshot, but also the Titan's Mid as well. And after solving a little hammer puzzle, which I think is solved by process of elimination, you can find another Dark World portal and the entrance to Turtle Rock, which this time we need the Quake Medallion for to open. Not only that, when you step inside, you also find out that you need the Cane of Samaria too, so they really wanted you to take on this dungeon last. Anyway, this dungeon can be intimidating, but I honestly think it's pretty cool too. And no, it's not because it features the likes of Chain Chomps, Pokies, and Fire Bars. I may be a Mario fan, but come on, I'm not that easily swayed by nostalgia. No, there are just some really cool features in here. I especially love the giant tubes you go through over the rooms filled with lava when I was younger. It just seemed like a really cool dungeon design. Do be careful though, because as you might expect, enemies will really hurt in here, and they will hurt you pretty badly if you take too much contact damage from them. Also, be wary of the laser traps too. They function in a weird way where they will only fire at you if you're facing in specific directions. So, if you can't seem to figure out their pattern, just hold out your sword in different directions and walk through its path until you can figure out the trick for it. One thing that'll help with these last things in particular though is the Mire shield, this dungeon's main item. Although, to be honest, this item is not very useful in retrospect, considering that if you have the Cape or Cane of Burna, you can just use that to avoid laser damage instead. Heck, even damage boosting works fine too if you know the best way to manage it. Still though, the chest is along the way, so may as well grab the shield regardless. The boss for this dungeon is Trinex, a vicious three-headed reptile, with his adjoining heads being of both fire and ice. And hey, you know what else is fire and ice? Those two magic rods we have. Use the opposing rod to take care of each elemental head in quick succession, and then put a couple of sword slashes on the main head when it starts slithering around. Once it goes down, you'll get your final crystal and finally rescue our fair Princess Zelda. Wow, look at that guys, we did it. Well, we rescued all the maidens anyway. We still have to take care of the wizard once and for all, but hey, at least we saved all the maidens. Ganon's tower is actually on top of Death Mountain as well, back in the location of where the Tower of Hera was in the Light World. And with all 7 crystals obtained, the maidens break the seal on the tower and allow us inside the final dungeon of the game. This dungeon is quite the doozy, as I'd almost say it's basically 2 dungeon tests in one. The first part involves finding the big key in the Ganon's Tower basement, and believe me, this basement is huge. There are technically 2 paths to get to the big key too, although I'd say the left path is more reasonable, and the right side is a very annoying torch puzzle to do, so if you don't want to do that, I'd definitely head for the left side. My many years of randomizer experience has made this dungeon quite the muscle memory experience though, and I've learned a lot of tricks to make some rooms a lot faster and more manageable. For example, this room requires lighting a torch to see a hidden path in the dark area, but using my knowledge from this game, you can actually just do this. Oh no, this puzzle sucks. Or does it? Also, this annoying room with the spinning floor tiles and Wallmaster, try putting on the cape and then grabbing the wall. You'll be completely invincible from all the projectiles and enemies, but you won't lose magic power either. A property of the game where it can't seem to execute 2 functions at once. It's kind of funny that it actually still works like this in the Game Boy Advance version too. Throughout the dungeon, you will also have to do some boss refights as well, but I'll say it now, they're just of the bosses from the Light World, so they shouldn't be too hard to beat. They'll just be in trickier boss arenas, like fighting the Armos Knights completely on ice, or the Landmo room containing a fireball shooter. Once you get the big key though, you can breathe easier, not only because you can start the second part of this dungeon, but you can also grab the red mail from the big chest, which will give you even more defense, perfect for the final stretch of the game. The second part of this dungeon is climbing the Tower Gauntlet, climbing several floors filled with rooms where you need to clear out enemies, fight against some of the bosses I mentioned earlier, even a couple more torch puzzles too. Basically, kind of a comprehensive test of what we've had to do in this game to this point, and definitely the most execution-heavy part of the game. Heck, in my many years of watching randomizer races, it's always exciting when you have a race between 2 people, and they happen to be in the GT Gauntlet at the same time. At that point, you know it's definitely going to be a pure contest of skill, and a very, very close finish. When you reach the refight with Moldorm, you know you're about done, and heck, unlike the earlier Moldorm fight, this guy actually gave me some issues on the refights. I don't know, maybe I was just fatigued from essentially doing a max % playthrough at this point. Who really knows? A few rooms after that though, we do come face to face with Ganon again, and he decides to give us a refight as well. This time with 2 clones joining his onslaught. However, these clones actually act more to his downfall than his benefit, as it gives extra sources of energy I can reflect to the big guy himself. in some cases giving me multiple hits in the same cycle, so was that really a good idea, man? Seriously, what kind of wizard are you? Once we take him down for good, the evil spirit of Ganon finally shows his face, and he takes off to head over to the Pyramid of Power, the location where we entered the Dark World from after the first wizard fight. Guys, I think it's time for the final battle. After we performed 2 last errands. I could have actually done this first thing earlier after beating Mire, since you only need to have crystals 5 and 6 to do this, but when you get those crystals, specifically, the Dark World Bomb Shop, which is actually the same location as where Link's house is in the Light World, will have a super bomb available to purchase, and you can actually use this bomb at the pyramid to open another fairy pool, much like the one we found in the Light World. We can use this fairy's power to upgrade not only our sword one final time, but also our arrows into silver arrows, the legendary ammo that can be used to damage the King of Evil. Yeah, those seem pretty important. However, there is still one final thing we have to do. Can you see what that is yet? Yeah, so this was kind of funny. I actually forgot a heart piece. Yeah, me, someone who has done literally 1,000 randomizer playthroughs to the point where I know every single item location in the game, yet one heart piece happened to slip my mind. In my defense, though, I did actually intend to get this heart piece earlier, and even called attention to it in the summary video when I was there previously. Remember that old guy's wall I blew up in the desert? Yeah, I have no idea why it slipped my mind to actually go into that room I made available. I think I was just so focused on seeing what the guy had to say for his dialogue that I just assumed I was done at that point. Whoops. Okay, so with all the hard pieces, all the items, weapons, and upgrades, including the max capacity upgrades, and even all the bottles, and literally opening up every single treasure chest in the entire game, it was time for the final battle with Ganon. And really, having everything in the game makes this fight pretty damn easy. Only 6 slashes with the gold sword will progress Ganon from Phase 1 into Phase 2, and Phase 2 into Phase 3. So if you're quick and persistent, you'll be on Easy Street before you know it. Phase 2 can actually be really scary too, as those magical fire bats are fast and can really throw you off with how they move. Phase 3 only requires 4 hits, where after each hit, he breaks away a row or column of the floor. And then you have Phase 4, probably the most important phase. Here, Ganon will turn off the lights, making it literally impossible to hit him, so you have to light the torches to make him vulnerable again. However, if you strike him with your sword, he won't actually take damage, but freezes himself instead. When he's frozen, that's when you need to hit him with a silver arrow, and once he gets hit with 4 of those babies, he'll be gone for good, and you can complete the game. However, I had a little fun with this fight, and actually did this the slightly harder and longer way. You actually don't need the silver arrows to beat Ganon. If you charge up a sword spin and release it just as Ganon gets ready to warp, you will actually still do damage to him. The downside to this, though, is that it does take more hits to finish him off in this fashion, as 4 silver arrows are the equivalent of 12 tempered or gold sword spins. So you'll be at this for a while, including the need to light the torches again if they do go out. So only do this if you want to give yourself a challenge, or if you actually run out of silver arrows and this is literally your only option. After Ganon goes down, we make our way to the golden triangles and receive the golden power for ourselves, which means it's time to make things right in Hyrule and officially save the world. After we do as such, the credits and epilogue start to roll, which means game complete. Now, I know, there's still the 4 Swords game on the table, but like I said before, I'll be doing that in a follow-up video, and not this one, so expect that at a later date and time where I'll give my updated scores and thoughts there. Although, I'll be honest, I don't really expect them to change much from here. When I do have that video up, I'll make sure it follows this video in the playlist just for consistency's sake, but if it's not on there now, it means that I haven't made it yet, so please bear with me. This series has definitely put me on quite the video and stream backlog, as you might have expected. In fact, I honestly expected to have the 4 Sword stuff recorded by now, but I just haven't. There just hasn't really been a lot of time for that, and I haven't been able to organize it appropriately either. But don't worry, it will come, and I will make sure I do a follow-up when I do get that done, believe me. But yeah, that was the Game Boy Advance version of A Link to the Past, and really, there's not much to say here that isn't already inherently obvious. I absolutely love this game. It's one of the best games, bar none, on the Super Nintendo, and I've been playing it for many years, so it's definitely one of the few early games that has always managed to stick with me. And thanks to the Link to the Past randomizer, my love for this game has even gotten stronger. However, as much as I gush about that randomizer, let me drop some hard facts on you. Link to the Past isn't great because of the randomizer. No. The randomizer is great because A Link to the Past is so good to begin with. It's a very accessible game that, while it can be challenging at times, it offers enough alternatives or safeties to give the player at least some kind of drive or hope to persevere despite the odds. So, like if a boss is becoming too difficult, you can actually leave and come back later after restocking on some items, or getting a fairy or potion or something, or maybe even returning with an item that might be even more effective. I also think the puzzles are really well done in a way where they aren't too complex, but not really brainless or free either. Usually the game gives you some kind of indication of what you need to do, whether it being a cleverly worded hint from a telepathic tile, or just experimenting with a recent item you got to see if that can do something in a room that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, despite the map suggesting otherwise. So yeah, accessibility all across the spectrum here. And honestly, this being the GBA version, it doesn't really devalue that experience whatsoever. Yeah, you can say what you want about the Link screams, or the button mapping, or even the quality of some of the sound effects, but it doesn't really change the overall experience of the game whatsoever. This game is just as fantastic as it is on the Super Nintendo, and if anything, it offers even more with the inclusion of 4 swords and some other additions we'll talk about later during the game's follow-up video. Do I still prefer the Super Nintendo version, though? Yeah, probably, and maybe that should logically take away some points from this version, but if I was somehow stuck on a deserted island with this version instead of the Super Nintendo one, I wouldn't exactly be disappointed about it either. It's still a really, really good game. So yeah, if it wasn't obvious, this game gets a 5 out of 5 for both game quality and personal enjoyability. The easiest 5 out of 5 I'll probably ever make for this series. And sure, the legacy of this game has definitely made it a no-brainer, and this score a little anticlimactic, but I can't really help that. This game has and will always continue to pass the test of time with flying colors, and it's a true testament to how well this game was made all of those decades ago. For difficulty, I landed on a 2 out of 5. Honestly, I could have probably taken it down to a 1 for me personally, since I've beaten this game so much over the years that it's practically easier than even breathing sometimes, but I tried to keep it a little more realistic to what a newer player would experience. There are definitely some difficult parts in this game, but I do think they are all things any player could overcome with adaptability and determination. Plus, the game has amazing accessibility for both pros and newcomers alike. So, yeah, it's not really a very hard game in a general sense, but I wouldn't say it's a free game either. So yeah, that'll do it for The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I'll get back to you guys later with the 4 Swords exclusive stuff at a later date and time. And obviously, if you do ever get interested in Link to the Past randomizer, please do yourself a favor and check it out. There are so many options, and you can make it as simple or intense as you want, pretty much leading to a new and unique gaming experience each time you play the game. It really has given me even more appreciation for this title, a game I already appreciate so much to begin with, and also gives this game even more longevity than I ever thought would be possible as a kid. And I think that says a lot about what this game has done for me. Thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned because here's a preview of the next game we'll be playing for this challenge.
Okay guys, thank you for watching this summary. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a comment and or like on the video, as those will really help me in these videos out. And stay tuned for future summaries of this series. If you also want to watch full playthroughs of these games for this challenge, check out the video description for a full playlist of everything that's been uploaded and exported so far. And if you're curious about what I'm playing right now for the challenge, be sure to stop by my Twitch channel to see what my current progress is. Just be warned, I'll be a lot further ahead of where we are for these summaries, so keep that in mind. This has been SlimKirby in the GBA series, and I'll talk to you fine people next time. Later, folks.